Welcome and good morning. Thank you for joining this breakout on ethics and digital twins. We're going to start out with a 10-minute chat between myself and Mark Enzer from the Centre for Digital Built Britain before moving on to a panel discussion for 40 minutes. So Mark, thank you for joining me. Perhaps we could start with you introducing yourself and telling us who you are.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I'm Mark Enzer. I'm the head of the National Digital Twin Programme, which is based at Cambridge University. It's a great programme, and hopefully we can dig into it in a little bit.
Great, thank you, Mark. And my name's Kevin McNish. I'm a digital ethics consultant at Sopra Steria, prior to which I was an academic philosopher at the universities of Leeds and Twente for 12 years, with researching and teaching ethics and technology. So Mark, talking about digital twin and ethics, where do you see digital twin in general, or the national digital twin in particular, in terms of ethics at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a centrally important question, and just to kind of set up a little bit of context for the question, we see the national digital twin as an ecosystem of connected digital twins. And we think that the overall programme, the National Digital Twin Programme, is a socio-technical change programme, the whole point of which is to enable better outcomes for people and society and for nature. So it's kind of starting with the outcomes in mind. Those outcomes are desirable outcomes. That's what we want. And we think that all of the digital twins within this ecosystem need to be founded on ethics. If the end point are these better outcomes, and the starting point was a report from the National Infrastructure Commission called Data for the Public Good. And the clue's in the name. It's kind of set the tone for the whole programme, informed what we think it's all about. So it's kind of saying that we're aiming for these good outcomes. The starting point is data for the public good. We think that the whole programme needs to be built on an ethical foundation. And I think one of the reasons why that's important is because using data for the public good isn't necessarily the default setting. There are other options available. And so you can imagine data being used for public control. We don't want that. You can also imagine data being used for narrow commercial gain or public exploitation. We don't want that. We want something in the middle, which is genuinely using data for public good. And given that it's not the default setting, it won't happen by itself. We think that we need to put real energy and leadership in to make sure that the National Digital Twin Programme is founded on ethics and is guided by ethics and ends up with good outcomes. So I'm trying to kind of put across the point that this is absolutely central. This matters.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And in fact, that was some of the thinking that went behind a report that we've just published with National Digital Twin today, or National Digital Twin Programme, I should say today, on ethics arising from the Gemini principles, which are, of course, the founding principles behind the National Digital Twin. And I think that report, which was based on both independent industry, academic research, and also some workshops that we held through the National Digital Twin Programme, just has brought up some really interesting challenges that are kind of facing us with the National Digital Twin ecosystem, as you say. One of which is, obviously, there's a very context-specific nature for digital twins. They're used in such a wide variety of contexts, whether it's with personal data or not personal data or environmental issues or whatever. There are so many different uses that it makes the ethical considerations quite specific to a particular use, but also the variety and complexity and the interplay that goes on between the Gemini principles themselves, but also then the ethical implications of those was also a very significant point which came out. And then I think finally as well, the other big one for me was the importance of stakeholder engagement, which I think is something we're seeing people talking about in ethics much more over the last 15 years anyway. But it really came home, I think, in the workshops as to the need to engage with the people who are going to be affected by this, to find out what their concerns and what their issues and their needs are. So, that was kind of what jumped out to me. I was wondering if what in particular, or anything that stepped out, that stuck out to you as a result in those workshops.
Well, quite a few things, actually. I mean, one of the main things for me was just the value of the workshops themselves, because you brought together some really interesting people from lots of different kind of points on the compass. And I thought that the conversation itself was incredibly useful. It helped us to think things which we hadn't thought before. And already said, Kevin, that we really feel that the National Digital Twin Programme needs to be founded on ethics. And one of the things which we did very early on in the programme was develop something we called the Gemini Principles, which was trying to kind of outline some values that we thought should guide the programme, almost like the conscience of the programme. And so the workshops worked through the Gemini Principles and kind of examined every single one of them from a number of different angles, kind of looking at the ethical implications and what needs to be thought about. And so what I thought was absolutely brilliant was the way that different people with different ways of thinking added to the argument. And it really supports what you just said about the stakeholder engagement. What this needs is actually a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue, a lot of having people coming in and thinking about it and talking about it. And I think that ends up being the route to getting to the right answer. I don't think it will be neat and tidy. I think it will be messy, but that's exactly what kind of the democratic process is. So I really felt that it was useful to dig into each one of the principles, under the headings of purpose and trust and function, and what constitutes trust, all those kind of things. But for me, the real value came from the conversation itself.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've, as I mentioned, the report. I think the link to the report is going to be put into the chat at some point, if not already. And in that report, we both give some of the general ethical points that were raised, but we do also go through the individual Gemini principles and highlight some of the ethics that came up. Although, again, to go back to my earlier point about context specificity, we can never give a sort of comprehensive list of these are all the ethical issues to work through, which is one of the, I think, one of the big challenges with dealing with ethics and technology. But what do you think, Mark, is the threat or the risk if we don't establish ethics at the heart of a national digital twin? I mean, you clearly care about this a great deal, but what would be the problem or the worst case scenario if we don't, or if we fail to get ethics into the national digital twin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of almost unthinkable, actually. It's the type of thing that we really don't want to go there. But you could imagine digital twins and connected digital twins being used for purposes that don't serve people and society and nature, and we want to avoid that. And I think that, as I said earlier on, it's not necessarily the default setting that we use data for the public good, and that's precisely why we need to bring this kind of leadership, the conversation, the energy into kind of always making sure, always holding us true to the original intent of data for the public good and the intent of driving better outcomes. So I think, simply put, if we don't do this, we won't get the right outcomes. It won't be the outcomes that we want for people and society and nature. So I think it's worth fighting for, actually. I think it's worth wrestling with, and I think it means that we need to enter into this messy process of working out what we actually want and then making sure that we jolly well get it.
Thank you, Mark. I couldn't agree more. I think it's an excellent point. Thank you. So, okay, I think now we're ready to move on to the panel discussion. So I think we're going to be joined by Ruth, Lisa, and Kirsty. Are they? Yep, excellent. Everyone's there. Wonderful. So maybe if I could ask you, each of you, to introduce yourselves as well. I'll just go in the order that you're on my screen, which is Ruth, if you wouldn't mind just starting.
Hi, I'm Ruth Cookman. I'm the head of policy at the Geospatial Commission. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of what has already been a very interesting discussion about digital twin technology and ethics. So just some background to my organisation. The Geospatial Commission is an expert committee in the Cabinet Office. And we're responsible for increasing and improving the use of location data across the public and private sector. And we published a UK-wide strategy last year. So in my role as policy lead at the Commission, I've been able to see the tremendous insights and services that location data and technologies like digital twins can bring. And this includes the projects that the Commission run and involved in, from our data improvement programs to our transport competition, and to everything our partner bodies are delivering in between. But it's also my job to think about how the use of location data and technologies can be improved, where the opportunities and the challenges lie. And one of the key challenges that I've been looking into over the last year is how do we unlock the many benefits of location data and technologies like digital twins and continue this wave of innovation whilst also ensuring public confidence? And what does ethical use of location data look like, and how do we realise that in practice? So the angle I'm hoping to bring to the panel today is my perspective from the research that I've led to be able to understand that. So we've engaged with the public through a public dialogue. We've also got outputs from engagement with academics. We've attended talks and roundtables, some organised by the Benchmark Initiative. And we've also run a quantitative survey, which we're analysing at the moment. So this work has focused mostly on location data ethics, which is my angle. And I know this point might sound obvious, but location data is at the heart of digital twins. So hopefully I can bring it back to that as well. Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Ruth. Lisa.
Hi all, great to be here today. So I'm Lisa Allen. I've worked many years across the public sector in data, and I'm now at the Open Data Institute. So I'm a firm advocate of the value of data for all of society and really creating that positive impact. At the Open Data Institute, I head up the Consultancy for Data programme. And at the ODI, we believe in a world where data works for everyone. So we work with organisations to help them along their journey. Be that through helping them with their data practices, they have trusted data, or through training them on ethical considerations or in the use of data. But previous to ODI, actually, I worked at Ordnance Survey. So like Ruth, I also have a penchant for geospatial data. And it's right, it's the critical data infrastructure that's really important for those foundations of digital twins. I was also involved with some of the Locus Charter, where we talked about those ethical considerations of using location data. And I think it's interesting how people see the use of location tracking apps and the potential for these for good in digital twins, but also how that could be used for harm too. So I think my experience has really stood me in good stead coming to the ODI, because we're a firm believer in data ethics. So for us, we talk about as data ethics being a branch of the ethics that evaluate data practices, the potential to create both trustworthy and positive impacts, but also the adverse impact on people and society. So it's really that balance and getting that balance right. We also think about the data practices we're referring to, like the collection, the sharing, the use of data. And some of the practices and tools we have, like the data ethics canvas, you'll probably be familiar with and using on a project basis. But we've seen organizations really struggling with data ethics and then coming to us for help, because it's a really hot topic at the moment. And that's great to see so many people talking about it. So we're doing some further practice and work on looking at the component parts of data ethics for organizations. So at the moment, we're looking at how can you not only just apply it to a project, but actually how can you be an ethical organization and considering it across the piece. So there's things we've been looking at, like what does that mean for organizational governance and internal oversight? What does that mean for the skills and knowledge for an organization? What does that mean for the data management processes? What does that mean for finances? And what does that mean for customers, but also staff engagement in it as well? And the last one about legal standard and compliance. So we've been looking at how we can bring that all together to really help organizations with that ethical data practices, because I think it's a really complex area. It's interesting to hear Mark talk, because digital twins are reliant on the flows of data between organizations, and it has to be those trusted flows. So it's great here to be talking about this today.
Thank you, Lisa. Really, really good. Kirsty.
Yeah, hi. It's an absolute delight to be on a panel with so many people that are working in such a positive and constructive way to try and make our use of data more accessible, but also more considered. I lead the Tools, Practices and Systems research program at the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. And you can think of the Tools, Practices and Systems program as being a horizontal program that connects up all of our different domain areas. So we have some digital twin work in data-centric engineering, in urban analytics, in modeling the health system. And so you can see how sort of perfectly it works to connect up all of those different research teams, thinking about the importance of modeling to be able to affect public policy and some of the decision makings within and across organizations. I sort of want to spend some time just plus oneing everything that's come before, and particularly thinking about sort of embracing kind of the organizational structures, what decision making, what legal and compliance perspectives need to be in place to allow everyone to move smoothly. I won't just say everything that Ruth and Lisa has said before me, but I will sort of hugely agree with them. I think one thing that I can add is that one of the things that we in Tools, Practices and Systems spend time thinking about is community engagement. And that's both in terms of communications within teams who are building these models, and also stakeholder and external user engagement. And we have two teams within the program who are leading on community engagement and what we call research applications management. And they're very, very overlapping, because we actually hope very much that users will come and be part of the creation of our models and the products that we're making. What we do spend a lot of time thinking about is some of the language that sort of creates barriers, that means that some people kind of find it very difficult to join in a conversation. Thinking about, we work with our training team to think about what skills people need beyond just sort of the jargon, but actually what skills do they need to be able to participate meaningfully in the creation of these models, the digital twins. And we also think about open access, open source, what do our licenses look like for the code that comes out, both in terms of sort of an auditability, a transparency around some of the decision making, transparency around some of the different possible opportunities, different possible pathways that a model could choose for itself or be tweaked to go down, and the reproducibility and reusability more generally. And then I think the last thing that I'll say, which I think actually underpins everything that everyone said so far, is that openness for us is very heavily interlocked with equity, diversity, and inclusion. That there is no point in being open if it is not for the purpose of making the world a better place and a more inclusive place to benefit from diverse experiences.
Thank you. And again, welcome everybody. Really great to have you all here. And I just also want to say, if anybody watching has any questions that they'd like to put into the Q&A, please do that, and we can run them by the panel as they come up. So I wanted to start out with a fairly general one, and this is kind of picking up on a point which was raised earlier in one of the plenary sessions about the risk of being ethical holding back innovation. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are people out there developing digital twins who are worried that if we take an ethical approach, such as Mark has been advocating, that somehow we're then going to fall behind in our development and where we stand in the industrial space. So do you think there is a risk that by being ethical, we could hold back innovation? Ruth, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think all too often ethics can be seen as a distraction or a complex series of tick boxes or something that's going to block innovation. But the reality is that innovators want to use location data responsibly to benefit society, the economy and environment. And the actual barrier lies in determining exactly what the right ethical, responsible, trustworthy data practice looks like. And for us, we've been engaging, widely. We've had the public dialogue dialogue, we've engaged with academics to try and understand this. And the way that we view ethics in the Geospatial Commission is it's all about unlocking the power of location data. Ethics is a facilitator of innovation. It's a facilitator of better use of location data. And by having ethical practices, that's how we safeguard it. That's how we bring the public on a journey with us. We bring stakeholders on the journey with us. And actually, ethics is the facilitator that will enable innovation. The other thing I was just going to say was that there is also an ethical dimension in needing to unlock all the benefits. Digital twins, you know, it's important for better infrastructure. It can make things safer. And one of the examples that we have is in the Commission is our National Underground Assets Register, which is going to map all of the pipes and cables below our feet. And this is an example of one of the real benefits that digital twins can bring, helping us sort of avoid accidental asset strikes and making works more efficient. So there's a real ethical benefit as well from these things. But thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Mark, you raised a hand.
Yeah, I was wondering if I can come in on that, because I think that actually having a good approach to ethics, and which I think is about kind of having ethics in from the foundation upwards, actually enables innovation. Because I think innovation very often works well within some guide rails. Because if you just give somebody a complete blank sheet of paper and say innovate, it doesn't really work that well. Whereas if you say innovate with this as the outcome that we want, and the outcome we want is the benefit of society, and you've got digital twins to work with, and these are the guide rails, I think it's actually a facilitator of innovation. One of the things that it might do, the kind of innovation that it might stop, and you have to forgive me here, but if Dr. Evil is in the middle of some volcano somewhere, it actually should stop that innovation. We don't want that innovation. So I think actually that what we're talking about here, so long as we build in the ethics from the very foundation, then it will, I think, be an enabler of innovation. What wouldn't be helpful is if we try and tack ethics on later on and it becomes some kind of tick box mentality, that would kind of get in the way. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think what we're talking about is building in ethics from the foundation upwards, providing these guide rails, and a clear outcome within which innovation can actually thrive.
Yeah, excellent point. So rather like we have safety by design, we have privacy by design, we need an ethics by design approach that, as you say, bakes ethics in. Rather than so just as if you're developing a car, you don't wait until a week before going to market to say, should we make this a safe vehicle? Likewise, in terms of the development of the technology, we need ethics to be in there from the get-go. Lisa.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think if you don't have it built in, then you can then end up with losing public trust. So innovation that would be really good, that then gets halted because people get scared and worried by it. So having that ethics by design, I totally agree. I think it's an enabler for innovation. It's not a distraction or something that's tagged on the end. It's fundamental upfront.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned in the report that Sopra Steria published yesterday that we kind of looked through the Gemini principles and looked at those, which is a fairly high level take on the ethics, the ethical issues arising around digital twin. But we've just been talking about companies that want to develop, and government agencies and academics that want to develop digital twins in an ethical way. How should they go about doing that? How should they go about identifying what the particular ethical issues are that they might be facing in order that they can then bake those into the process? Lisa, do you want to run with that one?
Yeah, no, happy to. So for us, I think we'd probably take a more of a structured approach around it. So it's thinking about, we'd use the data ethics canvas, looking at the things like the data sources they use and those limitations of those data sets that are coming through. But looking also at then the positive and negative impacts then, and looking to minimize harm, but maximizing those positive benefits. I think they'd also be looking at how you engage with people, how you communicate the purpose. So I think it's about bringing that openness and transparency, but really in documenting your actions. So I think that's the way to go ahead and putting it into a practical point of view if they're looking to do that.
Thank you. Kirsty.
Yeah, one thing that I was going to sort of add on top of everything that Lisa said is I think it really needs to be a shared responsibility. And so what that probably means is that everyone inside of the organization, so whether that's the sort of software developers or the data engineers or the statisticians, but also, you know, maybe the project managers, maybe some of the partnerships engagement folks, they all need to understand that this is a sort of, the ethical responsibilities are spread out across everyone. And I think, just linking into that, the question about sort of innovation before, I think some of the things that agile development has kind of nudged people towards thinking about is a real like divide and conquer, you know, sort of like break things down into as small a little kind of component part as possible, allocate that, and then try and protect people's time, particularly software developers' time, to be as laser focused on that one thing as they can be. And I think that is actually a huge ethical and innovation risk that organizations need to kind of grapple with. I think it's probably quick in the short term, but I think it leads to sort of potentially building something that is not actually aligned with the needs of the broader stakeholders. And I think it also potentially sort of leads to a disconnect across the team and across the organization in terms of thinking about those broader aspects. And so the other thing that I'll add on top of that, and I think this is another aspect where kind of I'm very, very pro an iterative approach. I think an iterative approach is exactly what everyone is going to need to take for anything developing something as ambitious as a digital twin. But there have to be people who are empowered to say stop, or to say no, or to say, I think this direction is not going in a way that makes me feel confident that we are meeting our ethical obligations. And I would love it. I think one of my great dreams is that we live in a world where every individual, so the newest software developer, the project manager, who you'd imagine probably should have some power in that way anyway, but anyone is able to sort of raise a flag. We talked in one of the workshops about the fact that you can whistleblow to the ICO. So you can really, there's like a great big step that organizations could take, but I'm really, really keen on sort of having organizations think about safety as being something where you welcome concern from members of the internal team. And that's something that's really supported rather than marginalized or punished.
Yeah, Mark, you raised a hand.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And one of the things I'd maybe want to pick up on is something that we talked about earlier, which is the value of the dialogue. And I think that is really important at working out some of the balance points that we need to get to. And I think this is related to transparency. It's kind of bringing it out into the open and grappling with it to get to the right answer. So the kind of example of what I'm saying is that right at the heart of the Gemini principles is this thing around trust. That the digital twins and connected digital twins need to be trusted. They need to be trustworthy. And in order to be trustworthy, we reckon that they both need to be as open as possible, and they need to be secure. And it needs to enable security and be secure itself. Now, those two things sound like they might be in conflict with each other, saying as open as possible, but also secure. And so that points to one of these balances, which is really important. And I think the way to get to the right balance is through that dialogue. To bring it out into the open. And I think we should recognize that balance point can change with time. So it's not as if we can have the dialogue once and for all and say, okay, we've sorted it now, because the public's view of kind of what level of security and openness they want might change with time and with events. And so it's not like we can kind of get away from the dialogue and think, oh, we've done it now. It's something which needs to keep going. And then I do very much agree with Kirsty that we kind of need some governance in there as well. Some kind of officials with whistles and flags who can say, no, we're not doing this anymore. It's gone too far, and possibly whistles and flags and teeth, if that's starting to describe the type of governance that's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, going back to that ethics by design approach, which is more than just setting requirements and then saying, right, that's it. You know, we've kind of set these high level goals and hands off now, of actually ethics being fully integrated in the development process as the system goes forward. And I liked that point you made, Kirsty, as well, about shared responsibility throughout the organization. And I might come back to that in a moment, but Lisa, you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, and it's been borne out by some of the work we've been doing and when we've been looking at our data ethics maturity model. So the work we've been doing is trying to what does putting data ethics in practice really look like, and those points I touched on. And it's been interesting because the people we selected for our user research will come on our data ethics and practitioner courses. So they would have been individuals who are really passionate about this. But some of their challenges is, how do you get data ethics throughout the whole organization? So that goes to Kirsty's point, you know, it's not just one person who can do this alone. It's got to be an organizational wide thing, and bring in those different elements of skills and training and understanding, you know, right the way through an organization.
I want to throw just one out here out of interest and see what people think about it. But going back to Kirsty's point about responsibility and shared responsibility, as you were just saying, Lisa, having that throughout the organization, as Mark said, throughout the whole process, is there a challenge in the way in which ethics is talked about, the way that ethics is taught at an academic level, at a university level, and at schools, whereby some people may see it as a threat, or they begin to see ethics as a sort of a police force that come in and tell them what they can and they can't do? Is there a challenge there? Are we dealing with ethics correctly, I suppose I'm asking, at the educational level?
Do you want me to go first? So yeah, so for some of ours, because obviously we're teaching data ethics, and we're sort of trying to increase the literacy of people. And I think it's just how you engage with people. I don't think it's about scaring them off. I think it's putting some of those real life examples in there. And because often a lot of these things are unintended consequences. They just don't realize, you know, like the discrimination that goes on through some of the use of names when you compare them to other names. You know, it's by giving those solid examples and then the impact that has on people. I think you can start seeing that some of these are unintended consequences, and they need to do a lot more thinking. I think sometimes maybe it helps, you know, with the trolley debate, isn't it? You know, who are you going to choose, the one person on their own or the group of individuals? I think that just gets people thinking. I think what people need, though, is for how do you put that into practice, because it is trying to cut off those unintended consequences. So yeah, I think it's got to come from maybe the theoretical debate to the how to help them through that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really key point, isn't it? It's about operationalizing these principles and these ideas. How do we actually get that into practice? I totally agree. Obviously, well, I say obviously, we could go back to Mark's Dr. Evil and his hollowed out volcano, but presumably most people are not setting out to create algorithms that are going to be racist, sexist, or biased in other ways. But, you know, you have aphorisms such as the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And while we're all clearly what we're trying to develop in technology is things which are going to help people and help society. But it's very easy along the way for those errors to creep in if we're not sort of sufficiently aware of them. And I know that this question about how do we operationalize ethics has been a very live one for the last few years in the debate. Kirsty, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah. I mean, not come back on it. Totally agree with you. Absolutely. Actually, one thing that I wanted to kind of highlight was Mark made a comment about kind of having people who have some teeth, right? So they can say no, and then there's sort of some consequences if they say no, rather than it being, you know, sometimes I think we have a fantastic team of ethics researchers at the Turing Institute and the Public Policy Program, and some people listen to them, but sometimes I hear them sort of saying over and over, sort of flagging these warnings, because when you get practiced, and many of the folks who are in this breakout room who are listening will be practiced, I know, you can see these sort of problems coming from quite a long way off. So one of the big difficulties is you really got to kind of be thinking far, far in advance in a very kind of concerned sort of space before you invest so much time that then it becomes hard to turn around. And one of the things that I wanted to share, actually, I'm the chair of the ethics advisory group at the Turing. So that's our institutional review board, or our ethics research committee. And we ran a fantastic workshop a few months ago in conjunction with the Ada Lovelace Institute. And we're producing a report on that. And the session was conducted under Chatham House rules, but I'm going to sort of share an element from the report without acknowledging anyone. We had people who ran ethics committees as universities, at universities and in different departments. And almost everyone said that once the money had come in, so if a grant had been funded, there was almost nothing that they could do to stop the research from happening. And I think that's something that is a really, really tough problem. It basically means that you can kind of have quite an adversarial setup of saying, we're not going to allow it to pass the ethics review, and you can get into this sort of very unpleasant sort of iterative review cycle where nothing goes forwards and everyone gets really frustrated and you start to work around ethics processes. And one of the things that we're recommending in the report, and one of the things that I would love for all organizations to kind of think about, is that it would be a great sign of confidence, I think, in the skills and in the understanding of the whole research team, including the ethics experts in the group, if changing the purpose of the project, pivoting it slightly. So rather than hitting like a great big stop on the project, such that it was what you said you were going to do at the beginning or nothing, that actually coming up with something that was not what we imagined at the beginning, but there's a logical and transparent flow of decision making that allowed it to sort of turn the corner and take a different path. I think that's a really constructive way forwards, to still put on some of those kind of those slow down, you need to turn signs without those teeth kind of biting off the whole or too much of the project itself.
Thank you, absolutely. So yeah, so I think it's a really good point where research ethics committees can again be enablers to help to see how the project could actually go forward beneficially in a positive way. And I've certainly been involved in more than a few of those discussions myself, where you, as you say, you can just orient the discussion, orient the focus, the research in a healthy way that is actually more beneficial. Again, provided that the ethics engagement is seen in that collegial way rather than an adversarial approach. Ruth, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks. This is all really interesting, and I'm agreeing with quite a few points that are coming up. I was going to just go back to sort of how do we operationalize ethics and give a bit of insight from what the Geospatial Commission's doing. So the next steps for our policy development are to develop guidance for organisations that use location data on what ethical, responsible use of that data looks like. So we're planning to publish that next year, which will hopefully be a helpful step and addition to the conversation. But we're also thinking about what does it look like once we've published that guidance, and a few things around operating ethics, and the solutions just aren't simple. And a few comments I have are, one is that there are subjective moving targets, like what is the public good, and how do we define what public benefit is, which is really difficult. We're also still establishing what the practical mechanisms are, things like what does good transparency actually look like in practice. And the third is, which I think has come up a bit already, is that we need to sort of future-proof these approaches, and there are going to be steps that innovators and people that use data need to use to establish ethical practice that we don't know about yet. So the importance of iterating and future-proofing those approaches as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I think there is so much potential power in the ability to define certain aspects, and particularly when you're talking about what is the public good or what is value, how are we defining that, what do we mean by that? And yes, I think it's something which I think all of us over the course of the last 40 minutes or so have raised, is the importance of engaging with stakeholders, and if not a completely democratic approach, certainly an approach which brings in people into the discussion. And maybe we do want a democratic approach, I don't know, we could discuss that. But is there a concern or a problem that for some people digital twin might come across as a bit sort of science fiction like? It's a little bit out there as to what we're talking about and what the potentials are. And if so, does that pose a challenge to our ability to really engage with the public, to have an informed discussion about what an ethical approach ought to be? Mark?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important point, because I think that in order to have an informed conversation, people need to know what we're talking about. And so if it does seem like some kind of weird science fiction thing over there that only technical specialists can talk about, then it won't get the kind of the exposure, the transparency that it needs. I think what that then means is that we have a huge obligation to explain it in very accessible ways, to let people in, to have the diversity of views brought to it that will ultimately make it a better thing. Because I think we all know that, that's one of the massive values of diversity, is bringing different thinking to the same thing makes it better. And so we have to expose it to that different thinking, which then means that we have to put a lot of effort into articulating it and making it clear so that people can understand it. One of the things which we did recently, and I think which kind of points towards this type of thing, on the National Digital Twin Programme, we've been working on something we call Credo. It's a climate resilience demonstrator. It's like a tangible working example of the National Digital Twin, and it's showing how you can share information across sector boundaries to make better climate resilience decisions, which all sounds a little bit technical, doesn't it? And it's kind of at the level of kind of the organizations in energy, water and telecoms. So it could all be very technical. But what we did was produce a film, just a 6-minute short film, which was basically telling the story in the mode of a soap opera. And it's amazing, 6 minutes, and somehow or other it draws you in. It's got some really good actors in it, and it packs an emotional punch, but it tells a story, and I think makes it accessible, which then means that people can get involved in the conversation. So the point I would kind of want to make on this is that I think that part of the obligation on us is to kind of de-technify it, to tell the story in accessible ways, so that we can invite in the other opinions, and then what will happen as a result of that is that we'll end up with a better solution. And on this kind of central point, that if we've agreed that the National Digital Twin, digital twins, all the work that we're talking about here is for better outcomes for people and society and for nature, then yes, we have to decide amongst ourselves, what are those better outcomes? And if the essence of the value is about making better decisions faster, who says what a better decision is? We need this diversity of opinion to help define exactly that. So my point, and sorry, I've taken a long time to explain a very simple point. My point is, we need to be able to tell the story in a very accessible way, because that will then invite in these diverse opinions.
That's a great point. And the Credo video is an excellent video. I watched it the other day, really enjoyed it. So yeah, would thoroughly endorse that. Ruth, you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with all of that, and have some first-hand experience, because the Geospatial Commission ran a public dialogue with 3 workshops and 85 members of the public to try and understand location data ethics. And as part of that, we worked with public dialogue specialists, Traverse and Ada Lovelace, who were amazing at taking these technical concepts and technical things around location data and producing things like easy read guides, sessions to explain the complexity. And this methodology is all about, and it's used in other types of innovation as well, it's about informing the public of the actual technology and how it works, and then taking them through conversations about the ethical dimension. So the intention is to have an informed conversation. And it was really interesting to reflect on how the views of the public sort of changed or through that process as they were more informed about it, as we were able to explain the benefits, and simple things like when personal data is aggregated and anonymized, it's used so much for public good, but the fear is that, it's personal data, but actually a lot of that data is aggregated and anonymous, which the public were less concerned about. And those sorts of things, which are technical, being able to explain that can help allay some of those concerns. So for me, it's about being able to explain those public benefits of data and bring the public on the journey with us. And actually, just to plug our launch event, which you're all welcome to come to, which the Alan Turing Institute are actually hosting for us. It's on the 16th of December. So yeah, you'll be able to read the report and come to the launch event if you're available.
A week tomorrow. Thank you. Lisa.
Yeah, I agree with all that that's been said by Mark and Ruth, but I also think it's about that data literacy across the society. And I think in some ways the pandemic has helped with that. I mean, who would have thought, you know, the Prime Minister standing up, looking at a graph, talking about data, that the public would have been gripped and actually really starting to understand, you know, the value of R. So those discussions that we've been having, I think have really helped with that. I think we just need more discussions like that so they understand the use of technology and the data and the impact on them. Because who would have thought, you know that WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook, all are the same, how they're using that data. But often we get digital resignation, so people just use those services because they want the service, but actually don't realise some of the harms that could potentially be coming out of them. So I think it's more about that open conversation, really. And I totally agree with Mark, the way that I've communicated to people so it doesn't appear sci-fi, it just appears normal.
Thank you. So that kind of leads on nicely to a question we've just had from the floor, which is one which often comes up in discussions about ethics, and that's the multicultural dimension, or even the international potential, I'll say that, for ethics to be relative to your culture or to your background. Now, there's an extent to which we're already going to engage with that when you've got multicultural stakeholder engagement, but is there a degree to which or how should we go about approaching any cultural ethical concerns along those lines? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean, I think from my own experience that I think we've seen in both AI ethics debates in the last 2 or 3 years, and also in data protection law and discussions over slightly longer, there's actually, I've seen a large degree of convergence of people's opinions, whether they're from California or from China or from Russia. There seems to be a lot of similarity in approaches, and we're all converging on some very similar principles. But Kirsty, what do you think?
So I think this for me sort of comes back to what I said when I introduced myself around what's the purpose of open data, what's the purpose of having a reproducible model, and it comes down to this equity, diversity, and inclusion element. And I think it's thorny. So you know, sort of there's this acronym of JEDI, so adding the word justice at the beginning of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think that's something that I would really love for sort of leaders in organizations, particularly those who lead technical teams, to kind of grapple with a little bit more than maybe we kind of currently do. I think equity and inclusion is also something that's often a nice to have, a bit like ethics itself, you know, off to the side. In many cases, it's sort of volunteer led if you're a member of the working groups, things like that. Whereas what I love about the sort of the JEDI acronym, so putting justice in there, is I think it helps to sort of orient people around why are we considering equity and inclusion? What is the purpose? And what that means is that there can be some sort of difficulties that folks have to grapple with internally, both across an organization, but also as an individual, around, you know, not allowing the majority opinion. So who votes on a particular sort of decision within an organization, who is represented at the table. And you know, we've talked about sort of stakeholder engagement. We've talked about bringing people in. That is ultimately the answer, but you also have to be prepared to change your direction. When you bring someone in, you have to be able to slow things down to find the groups on the ground who are having those conversations. So you're not sort of tokenizing, bringing in just one representative of each demographic group, for example. You have to really wrestle with the intersectionality of some of the different kind of lines of oppression. And then I suppose that's big, you know, that's like you think about that when you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, maybe I might just go and lie down again. That's like a big challenge. But what I really, really want to encourage folks who have sort of, you know, some element of power inside of their organizations. One of my friends who is a data scientist in the US, he's a Black gay man. His name is Tion Brooks. And he said to me years ago, you don't need a diversity committee if you have a diverse committee. So actually employing people who have lived experience of these various different angles of these various different cultures, whether they've spent time in other countries, whether they are sort of a particular religion, for example, or a particular ethnic background, if they are already in the team, it is so much easier to kind of avoid going down a place where you've sort of come up with a plan that now needs to be externally criticized. So supporting those members of the team is a great pathway forward. It's a little bit slow. You have to do an awful lot of work in terms of the outreach and the recruitment, but it's a great delivery when you get there.
Yes, that's a really good point, and a great place to end as we have now run out of time. But thank you everybody so much for the discussion. Thank you for the questions that came from the floor. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I know, I was going to say I'm sure, but I know that we could carry on talking about this all day, as many of us have already. I've spent a lot of time discussing this in the past. So I think there's plenty here to get our teeth into and to take forward. And I would finally just encourage people to look at the Sopra Steria report that's been linked to this through National Digital Twin Programme. Also Ruth's event coming up at the Alan Turing Institute, and anything else that I've forgotten that was mentioned. We're now going to take a break for lunch for 30 minutes. There's nothing between us and lunch, so I hope if you've been watching this that you've enjoyed it, and enjoy your lunch, and we will see you again at 12:30. But thank you again to Ruth, Lisa, Kirsty and Mark for your engagement, and thank you to Tech UK for hosting this really interesting discussion.